Hey everyone, I'm Harry, and I work in a quiet nursing home where I witness life's sweetest and toughest moments. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. Today I've got a tale that will tug at your heart and remind you why family and justice matter. Let's get started. Dorothea Ingram was a woman of 80 years and yet walked with a grace that belied her age. At 78, her silver gray hair, meticulously gathered into a low bun, shimmered in the afternoon sun. Her blue-gray eyes, gentle and serene, bore out witness to the countless moments of tenderness and hardship that had shaped her life. Her soft features, lightly lined by time, radiated warmth. She usually wore her favorite floral dress, its pastel petals dancing across the fabric, and a cozy cardigan draped over her shoulders. In her hand rested a polished wooden cane, its handle worn smooth by years of faithful service. Her children Lillian and Stephen had grown accustomed to the house that she and her husband Robert had built over 50 years ago. Back then, the house had been filled with laughter and music, grandchildren's toys scattered across the living room floor. Later, as the family had grown older and busier, the home transformed into a quiet haven. Dorothea found joy in tending the flower beds that bloomed each spring, chatting with neighbors during her daily walks, and baking pies for family gatherings. But as the years passed, her children's lives became consumed by their careers and ambitions, leaving her increasingly alone. Lillian, the eldest, lived just across town. She worked as a hospital administrator, her days consumed by emails, meetings, and hospital crises. Stephen, a corporate lawyer, traveled frequently for work. Each time Dorothea had asked for minor assistance, help with groceries, or a ride to a doctor's appointment, they offered half-hearted promises, only to cancel at the last minute. Dorothea understood their busy schedules. She had always been understanding, sacrificing her own needs for theirs. But beneath her tolerance lay a growing ache, a sense that her worth was diminishing in their eyes. The decision to send her to Ambleton Manor, the local nursing home, was not reached overnight. It began as gentle suggestions, veiled as concern. "Mom, you could use the care you need," Lillian had said softly one evening over takeaway Chinese food. "We worry about you being alone," Stephen had chimed in. Dorothea had smiled, tried to reassure them, but sensed the undercurrent of guilt in their voices. The final blow came when the two siblings jointly visited her one Sunday afternoon. The living room, once her sanctuary, felt cold as they presented lists of schedules, proposals for in-home care, and finance spreadsheets. For a brief moment, Dorothea considered refusal. But her body, weary from years of arthritis, and her heart, tired from loneliness, acquiesced. Pride fluttered in her chest as she gave them her blessing, but beneath it lay a searing heartbreak. She watched as the movers came, boxing her beloved possessions, handwritten letters, vintage photographs, her late husband's guitar, in plain cardboard. Each item that vanished into those boxes felt like a piece of her soul being confiscated. The week before her departure, she spent long hours by the fireplace, tracing the family photographs on the mantel, her wedding day, her children playing in the yard, whispering souvenirs of love now gone cold. On her final night in the house, Dorothea sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, the soft glow of embers illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She traced the outlines of family photos on the mantel, images imbued with warmth she no longer felt. Tears escaped her eyes as she whispered a silent vow. This wasn't the end. She would show them that beneath her frail exterior lay resolve as iron as any blade. The following morning, Dorothea was escorted to Ambleton Manor. The drive felt surreal. The familiar neighborhoods gave way to streets she had seldom traveled. She clutched her wooden cane, its polished handle smooth against her palm. Upon arrival, the manicured lawns of the manor hid a labyrinth of corridors inside. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air like unwelcome smoke. Dorothea was guided by Nurse Ramirez, whose kind face offered reassurance, though her eyes flickered with busyness. Her first roommate, Mrs. Haversham, was a talkative widow who prattled on about bingo nights and stale pudding. The rooms were neat, but clinical. A simple bed with crisp linens, a small dresser, and a window with a view of a brick wall. Fresh floral wallpaper, intended to be cheerful, felt artificial against Dorothea's memories of the vibrant gardens she once nurtured. Loneliness gnawed at her heart. Each hour she wandered the corridors, navigating a world where laughter sounded hollow and smiles seemed forced. She watched children visit their grandparents, their eyes bright and curious, and felt a pang of envy and sorrow. She attended group activities, piano recitals, chair yoga, art therapy, though her heart wasn't in them. Even the carrots in the cafeteria tasted bland, devoid of the flavor she remembered from her own kitchen. Days passed, blending into nights. Dorothea observed the staff's efficient routines, dispensing medications, helping residents bathe, pushing wheelchairs to the courtyard. It was not the life she had envisioned for herself. Some nights she dreamed of her warm kitchen, the aroma of fresh bread, and hidden in her heart, of revenge. She pondered how her children had orchestrated this betrayal, their cold words, their convenient excuses, their final visit that had felt more like a transaction than love. One afternoon, while reclining in a wheelchair transported to the sunny courtyard, Dorothea noticed a fellow resident, old Mr. Benson, struggling to feed the birds. His hands, gnarled by arthritis, trembled as he tried to fling seeds. Dorothea, summoning strength, rose from her chair and moved over. Leaning on her cane, she approached with measured steps. "Here, let me," she said softly. Guiding his trembling hand, she helped scatter seeds, watching the birds flutter with delight. "Thank you, dearie," Mr. Benson said, his eyes reflecting gratitude. In that moment, Dorothea realized she had allies here, people who understood hardship, loneliness, and even betrayal. They were her witnesses, and perhaps unwitting accomplices in the retribution she would craft. That evening, she wrote a letter, meticulously composed in her elegant handwriting, to a lawyer she had known decades ago. She recalled how, early in her marriage, she had saved a sum of money while Robert was away overseas. She had tucked it away, intending to surprise him with it upon his return. But Robert had discovered her secret stash and promised to hold it for her. After his death, the money had vanished, unaccounted for, leaving her limited savings. The lawyer, Mr. Fowler, had been the executor of Robert's estate. She tucked the letter beneath her pillow. Sleep that night felt like a fleeting escape. She dreamed of dark suits and whispered conversations. The next morning, Dorothea discovered a reply from Josiah Fowler. His email was succinct. He had reviewed her documents and agreed that there were grounds to challenge Robert's estate. He requested a notarized power of attorney document, which he attached in PDF form, and asked for her signature. He also mentioned he would need to research bank records, trusts, and property titles. Dorothea felt a sense of triumph. She replied quickly, thanking him, and arranged for the notarization at the manor's small administrative office. Within days, Mr. Fowler's paralegal, a sharp-eyed woman named Camilla Trent, arrived. She brought with her an array of documents, piles of ledgers, and a keen determination to sift through decades-old information. Dorothea sat beside her at a small table in the common room, tracing her finger across lines of numbers and annotations. Camilla explained that Robert had set up a trust in his name, but never fully updated the beneficiaries. When he died, the funds reverted to accounts controlled by his business holdings. Dorothea's heart pounded as she realized how close her children had come to unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, mismanaging those funds. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Dorothea discovered that her children had no idea their mother had the means to challenge them. In their eyes, they had been generous, paying for her care, ensuring she lacked nothing. Little did they know that their own resources tied to Robert's estate were dwindling as fees accrued. Dorothea relished each moment of watching them remain oblivious, believing their betrayal was without consequence. One chilly afternoon, as autumn leaves tumbled outside the window, Dorothea received word that a bank in Charlotte acknowledged a dormant account under her name. Camilla arranged for a meeting, and Dorothea, supported by Mr. Benson's steady arm, traveled with the paralegal to the bank. The teller unlocked the dusty records vault and, within a locked drawer, produced a ledger filled with faded entries. The balance, even after decades, amounted to a small fortune, enough to embarrass a lawyer's salary. Dorothea felt a flush of exhilaration and triumph, knowing her children would soon learn the true weight of their neglect. Back at the manor, Dorothea composed a letter to her children. She addressed it to both Lillian and Stephen, using their childhood nicknames, Lil and Stevie. The letter began with fond recollections of family vacations, warm summer evenings by the lake, and bedtime stories she had read to them when they were young. She wrote of her pride in their accomplishments, concealing her true intentions behind a veil of maternal affection. The final paragraphs, however, took a chilling turn. You have ensured that I spend my twilight years in sterile halls, while you pursue your ambitions without a glance backward. I am grateful that you, my beloved children, will now be held accountable for the legacy you so carelessly discarded. The Ingraham Family Property Trust, commonly understood to be under your stewardship, shall be subject to conditions you did not foresee. I would advise you to review your own affairs, for I intend to collect what is owed. She sealed the envelope with trembling fingers, her lips curving into a faint smile of vindication. When the Manor's mail cart brought her children's mail a few days later, Lillian opened the letter first. Her cheeks drained of color as she read. She called Stephen, her voice trembling. Dorothea, in the privacy of her room, imagined their shock as they digested the realization that their mother's inheritance could undermine them. She knew that whatever legal counsel they sought would be too late to salvage their peace of mind. Early the next morning, Dorothea received a second email from Josiah Fowler. He was drafting the power of attorney and expected a courier to arrive for her notarized signature. Dorothea, guided by Mr. Benson, carefully signed the documents. Camilla Trent then retrieved bank statements, property deeds, and Robert's original will, presenting them in a neat folder. Within days, Mr. Fowler himself arrived at the manor. He and Dorothea met in a quiet side room. He reviewed the ledger from Charlotte and confirmed her rights, explaining how Robert had intended for her to receive the proceeds should anything happen to him. Your children allowed this to slip through their fingers, Fowler said gently, but we will make sure justice is done. The weeks that followed were relentlessly busy. Camilla continued her diligent research, subpoenaing records and building a case. Dorothea discovered that Lillian, in her role as hospital administrator, had control over a charitable fund that Robert had funded, intended for community health initiatives. Stephen had transferred a portion of his inheritance into offshore accounts. The revelations deepened Dorothea's resolve. Her children had not only abandoned her, but had actively profited from her vulnerability. One November afternoon, Dorothea saved her last draft of the letter to the local town council. The council was considering budget cuts that threatened funding for elder care facilities, including Ambleton Manor. Drawing upon her history as a former community leader, she penned a letter painting a dire picture. Without proper funding, residents would face neglect, understaffing, and a lifetime of silent suffering. Her elegant handwriting, every loop and flourish, lent authority to her plea. Several council members who remembered Dorothea's charitable work convened an emergency meeting. Lillian, who had political aspirations, watched with alarm as her mother's letters gained traction. She phoned the editor of the newspaper, attempting to refute her mother's claims by citing financial reports, but the local populace responded with concern, rallying behind Dorothea's vision for improved elder care. Donations to the manor spiked, accompanied by letters of support addressed to Dorothea Ingram, champion of the elderly. As Thanksgiving approached, Dorothea received an official notice, a court hearing scheduled to review her challenge to Robert's estate. The hearing was set for 2 months later, and her heart thumped with anticipation. She knew her children, despite their resources and connections, would struggle to defend against her claims, which had the backing of Josiah Fowler's meticulously gathered evidence. On Thanksgiving Day, the residents of Ambleton Manor gathered in the dining hall for a communal meal. The long tables were adorned with autumnal wreaths and platters brimming with roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce. The aroma was comforting, yet bittersweet. Dorothea, dressed in her floral dress and a light cardigan, sat at the head of the table, flanked by Mr. Benson and a few other residents who regarded her with admiration. Outside the large window, the leaves painted the world in reds and golds. Someone began to hum a familiar hymn, "Count Your Blessings." Dorothea closed her eyes, listened, and allowed herself a moment of genuine gratitude. She was surrounded by allies, wielded newfound power, and had turned her children's betrayal into an instrument of social justice. As the first slice of pie was served, she raised her fork in silent toast to the path she had charted. Soon, her children would realize that every misdeed counted. In the days that followed, Dorothea noticed subtle changes. Lillian stopped attending council meetings to defend budget allocations. Instead, she spent her weekends huddled in her office, poring over financial statements. Stephen called only when he needed legal clarification, his tone respectful but cautious. Dorothea received occasional flowers from Lillian, perfunctory gestures that masked deeper anxieties. Dorothea arranged for Camilla Trent to prepare an amendment to her power of attorney. She would include stipulations ensuring a portion of any funds reclaimed went directly toward scholarships for local high school students hoping to pursue geriatric care vocations. Dorothea also cultivated another thread of her plan. She learned that a National Elder Care Foundation was looking for success stories to feature in their annual report. She drafted a letter describing her journey from abandonment to advocacy and attached photographs of the manor's blossoming garden and newly renovated dining hall. Within weeks, a representative from the foundation visited the manor, interviewed her, and took pictures. The foundation announced that Ambleton Manor would receive a substantial grant, far larger than the town council's budget. Local headlines read, "From Betrayal to Blessing. Dorothy Ingram transforms elder care in Ambleton." The winter frost settled over Ambleton Manor, coating tree branches in delicate crystals. Dorothy awoke early one December morning to discover a stack of envelopes on her bedside table, formal invitations from civic groups praising her advocacy for elder care. Her story had resonated beyond town, reaching the ears of journalists and philanthropists alike. She sifted through the letters, each bearing thanks and pledges of donations. The manor would soon see renovations funded by anonymous benefactors. In contrast, news from her children grew darker. Stephen had filed an injunction to halt her estate claim, citing technicalities and contesting the validity of the evidence. He had hired a formidable attorney, one known for intimidating tactics. Dorothy peered out the window as snowflakes drifted softly, her resolve undeterred. She trusted Fowler's strategy. The truth would prevail over deceit. One afternoon, the manor held a holiday concert featuring a local string quartet. Dorothea sat in the front row, feeling the gentle vibrato of the cello resonate through her bones. As the music swelled, she noticed Stephen enter quietly, his expensive coat drenched from slushy walkways. His gaze met hers for a fleeting moment, puzzled, remorseful, perhaps even fearful. He stood at the back, blending with other visitors. Dorothea chose not to acknowledge him. Instead, she allowed her mind to journey to the next steps of her plan. After the concert, Mr. Benson approached her, excitement alight in his eyes. "Mrs. Ingram, the foundation in Charlotte has agreed to match any donations up to $10,000. These funds will go directly to the manor's dining hall renovation." Dorothea gave a measured nod. "Excellent news, Harry. I always believed in the power of community." Harry smiled, his gaze affectionate. "You've done more for these walls than any renovation could." That evening, Dorothea penned another letter, this one addressed to the local television station. She recounted her story, her dedication to family, her betrayal, and her crusade for justice. The station interviewed her in a cozy corner of the manor's library. Dorothea sat in her floral dress, her hands clasped, speaking with quiet authority. Viewers watched as she described the indifference of her children and her efforts to secure a dignified life for all residents. Their sympathetic faces mirrored her own quiet confidence. Days later, during a national broadcast segment on elder rights, the story of Dorothea Ingram became a cause célèbre. Letters poured in from distant towns. Donations doubled once more. Meanwhile, Lillian and Stephen found themselves painted in a harsh light by the media. Colleagues whispered about their neglect, and friends recoiled, not wanting to be associated with perceived callousness. Their reputations teetered, their finances strained by mounting legal fees. Even board members at Lillian's hospital distanced themselves. Yet Dorothea remained steadfast. Each morning she would sit by her window, sipping tea and reviewing news clippings that highlighted the growing public outcry. She felt invigorated, ready to confront her children directly in the courtroom. An impending verdict loomed on the horizon, and she welcomed the challenge, knowing her vengeance was as righteous as any prayer. January arrived with brittle winds and pale sunlight. On a crisp morning, Dorothea was wheeled into the courtroom, her cane resting across her lap and her floral dress beneath her dignified coat. Mr. Fowler sat by her side, papers arranged neatly before him. Across the aisle, Lillian and Stephen sat with their attorney, their faces drawn and weary. Dorothea noticed the lawyers whispering, casting occasional glances at her, as though they expected the fragile old woman to crumble under pressure. The judge, a stern-faced man named Judge Harrington, called the session to order. Mr. Fowler presented the evidence with calm precision. bank ledgers, official documents, affidavits from former colleagues who remembered Robert's intentions. He demonstrated how the trust had defaulted to Dorothea and how her children had knowingly allowed the funds to slip into their control. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Lillian's attorney rose to object, arguing technical errors in paperwork, missing signatures, and alleged misinterpretations of Robert's handwritten notes. Lillian and Stephen watched as their mother listened intently, her blue-gray eyes steady. She tilted her head slightly when she recognized an acquaintance seated in the gallery, a former neighbor who had witnessed her husband's declining health. The neighbor nodded subtly, a silent sign of solidarity. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as she realized the depth of evidence against them. Stephen's posture slumped, his jaw clenched. After hours of deliberation, the judge declared a recess. Dorothea felt relief mingled with anticipation. The children did not approach her. Instead, they huddled with their attorney, whispered words she could nearly overhear: regret, panic, desperate pleas. Dorothea sipped her tea, offered by a sympathetic court clerk, and studied her children from across the room. Once a deep love had bound them to her, but now a rift lay between them, as chilling and relentless as winter winds. Later, the judge returned. He delivered his ruling. The trust was indeed under Dorothea's rightful control, and the children were ordered to relinquish any claims. Furthermore, they were instructed to pay restitution, a portion of their salaries garnished to cover legal fees and damages. The courtroom gasped. Dorothea felt tears prick her eyes, not of sorrow, but of vindication. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as Judge Harrington dismissed the case. After the ruling, reporters swarmed the courtroom doors. They clamored to speak to Dorothea, to hear her recount the victory. Lillian and Stephen slipped away, their heads bowed. Dorothea, escorted by Mr. Fowler and Camilla Trent, faced the cameras. She spoke with grace and poise, emphasizing forgiveness, the importance of family, and ensuring that no other elder suffered as she had. Her words resonated across the community. They painted her not as a spiteful avenger, but as a champion of justice. That evening, back at the manor, a small gathering celebrated Dorothea's triumph. The dining hall was decked with garlands. Residents and staff cheered as Dorothea cut a modest victory cake. Mr. Benson raised his cup in a toast. To Dorothea Ingram, proving that age is no obstacle to strength. She accepted the praise with humility, her heart buoyant. Yet, deep within, she knew her path was winding to its close. The final act of her plan, she believed, was almost complete. In the days that followed, Dorothea returned to her routines, tending to small tasks around the manor, engaging in conversations with residents, and overseeing the progress of renovations. The children, their resources diminished and their reputations tarnished, attempted feeble gestures of reconciliation: flowers, perfunctory calls, vague apologies. Dorothea accepted them with measured courtesy, but kept her distance, her heart no longer open to casual gestures of remorse. One bleak afternoon, as snow still lay in patches around the courtyard, Dorothea received a final letter from Lillian. "Mother, we wish to make amends and ensure your happiness. Please let us visit." Dorothea sat with pen poised. She thought of the promise she had made to herself, that their betrayal would not define her twilight, but nor would she ever forget. With deliberate strokes, she wrote, "My dear Lil and Stevie, I appreciate your willingness to reconnect. I trust you have come to understand that love is not measured by ease, but by sacrifice. I have arranged for a trust fund that will ensure your future families are provided for, as I have always wished. However, the legacy you neglected will not be yours to squander. Use this gift wisely, as a reminder that kindness begets kindness. I, Dorothea Ingram, will attend the bountiful Spring Festival on May 3rd. Should you arrive, I will greet you with open arms. With love, Mother." She sealed the letter, the final point of her revenge, a sting cloaked in generosity, a message that conveyed not just triumph, but a lesson etched in every word. Spring arrived with a chorus of birds and blossoms. Dorothea, resplendent in a floral dress and light coat, made her way to the festival in a small procession led by Mr. Benson and other residents. The town square buzzed with music and laughter. Booths overflowed with local crafts, baked goods, and flowers. As she approached the main stage, a ripple of recognition swept through the crowd. This was the woman who had challenged her children, rallied a community, and emerged victorious. At noon, Dorothea spoke to the gathered townspeople about unity, empathy, and the importance of respecting one another, especially the elderly. Her voice, though soft, carried conviction. In the audience, she spotted Lillian and Stephen standing near the back, their faces solemn. They wore black coats and expressionless masks, uncertain whether to step forward. After her speech, Dorothea descended the stage and walked toward her children. The crowd parted, sensing the moment's gravity. Lillian gasped, stepping forward first. "Mother," she whispered. Dorothea paused, her gaze warm yet guarded. "My dear Lil," she said, her voice gentle, "I am proud of the woman you have become, but it pained me to watch you forget what matters." Lillian's eyes brimmed with tears. Stephen reached for her hand. Dorothea lifted her own, letting them hold it briefly. "I have my revenge," she continued. "But it is not in spite. It is a reminder. Let this day stand witness to forgiveness." She smiled, and the siblings wove themselves into an embrace. Around them, the festival resumed, laughter, music, and the hum of life. That evening, Dorothea returned to Ambleton Manor, weary but content. She settled into her favorite chair, placed her cane beside her, and gazed at the soft glow of the lamps. She understood that revenge had been a path to reveal wounds long ignored, yet in its culmination she had found not only justice but the possibility of healing. As she closed her eyes, the memory of the festival's blooms lingered, promising that even in winter's aftermath, new life and new relationships could blossom. 1 year later, the manor had transformed. The dining hall gleamed with fresh coats of paint, a bright mural depicting community scenes stretching across one wall. A new rose garden bloomed where ice once covered the ground. Dorothea, leaning on her cane, walked the winding path lined with pastel blooms, her steps slow but sure. Mr. Benson, his voice gravelly with age, accompanied her, recounting tales of new residents who had moved in, each brightened by the manor's revitalization. Her children visited often now, not out of obligation but out of genuine love. Lillian brought homemade pastries on Sundays, and Stephen arrived with his grandchildren in tow, eager to play games with her. They sought her advice on life decisions, listened to her stories of resilience, and showed respect that once seemed inconceivable. Dorothea watched them with serene eyes, remembering the journey from betrayal to redemption. In the evenings, she penned a memoir, recounting her life's lessons. She wrote of love, loss, and the unexpected power she discovered within herself. The final lines of the manuscript read, "I have learned that vengeance, when tempered with compassion, can open the door to forgiveness. I am Dorothea Ingram, and my story is testament to the fact that no matter how cold the winter, the heart can always find a way to bloom." Dorothea Ingram.